Hey there, everyone. This is Samuel Johnson, and welcome to the final episode of the Garden Wall Perspectives. And today, we're going to be discussing episodes 9 and 10 of Over the Garden Wall, / the final episodes of the series, Into the Unknown and the Unknown. And I apologize in advance if it feels like I'm rushing through everything for this vlog. I recorded a half-hour long vlog prior to this one, but I wound up having to scrap it due to doggy-related technical difficulties, so again, if it feels like I'm rushing through anything, I apologize in advance, so yeah. Anyway, let's get to the story. When we last left Wirt and Greg, they were kind of in dire straits. After they abandoned Beatrice at the end of the previous episodes, they just started wandering through the unknown, and Wirt sadly had to face one sad reality. He had no idea what he was doing, and when this reality set in, it caused him to, well, lose hope. And while Greg was still very hopeful and determined that they would eventually get home, sadly, Wirt's own helplessness caused him to start slowly turning into an Edelwood tree. Greg wound up noticing this, and as a result, he realized that if they wanted to get home, then that he would need to do something dire. And so, as part of this, Greg wound up making a deal with the Beast, which wound up causing Greg to go off with the Beast and leave Wirt and his frog behind. Wirt eventually realized that his brother was missing, and when he went out to search for him, sadly he found his own bad luck as he wound up going out onto a frozen lake and fell through the ice. Thankfully, he is saved from the cold water by a passing fisherman in Beatrice. But sadly, even though he's pulled out of danger, hypothermia still catches up to him, and as he's in their boat, he ends up passing out, which is where Into the Unknown begins, as we end up seeing what exactly Wirt is dreaming about. And in this case, it turns out that what he's dreaming is a memory. In this case, specifically, a memory that explains how Wirt and Greg wound up getting into the unknown. And well, before I talk about that, I should probably mention something about the series. Throughout the series, we're kind of left with several questions about I want to say, continuity of the show, like when it takes place. And we are given a lot of weird hints and details that don't really seem to add up, but all of them seem to equate to the unknown somewhat kind of maybe existing in the past, because the unknown has different aspects of different past time periods. The fairy definitely seems like an old-timey fairy. We saw the pilgrim village of Pottsfield, which, while having supernatural elements to it, did still feel like it could exist in some regard, even if it's in a place that seems mystical. We saw the inn. There was the inn that the boys stopped at, and its denizens. There was the tea maker and his business rival and their mansions, which are both from different time periods. Essentially, or throughout the whole series, it all makes it look as though the series takes place in the past, and that Wirt and Greg might just be from some village somewhere, which is exemplified by their outfits. Well, this episode kind of pulls a village on us and reveals when Wirt and Greg are from. They're from the present day. Yeah, it turns out that Wirt and Greg are actually from our time period, and the reason why they were dressed the way they were was because they've started their journey into the unknown on a Halloween night, with both of their outfits being their Halloween costumes. Greg's costume is supposed to be an elephant, hence the kettle on his head, because it was supposed to be a trunk, and Wirt's costume, I think it's supposed to be a wizard. They never say what it is, because Wirt never outright says it, but I think it's supposed to be a wizard, because his hat was a Santa hat that he cut the trim off of, and his cloak was from a mailman costume from a mailman outfit that he just utilized for it. But so on top of that, it also explains why Greg's pants are full of candy at the beginning of the series, because Halloween. And on top of that, it also fills in details on certain other aspects. Like, for example, a detail I neglected to mention about Greg is that he carried around a rock with a face on it, and it turns out he got that rock from an old lady that he said he got the rock as a reward for helping her garden. And the frog that they were after was something that Greg wanted to get, because he and Wirt were supposed to go out frog catching, and Wirt just kept putting it off. So there you go. We actually get some details about what happened Wirt and Greg prior to them entering the unknown, and it's not just those details that get expanded on. We actually learn more about the circumstances surrounding Wirt and his lost love. In this case, on this particular Halloween night, Wirt wanted to give his I guess I could just say lost love, a girl named Sarah, a mixtape. But the only problem is Wirt's a weenie. And while he got the tape all ready for her, unfortunately he can't really muster up the courage to go talk to her, as he quite literally is an outsider looking in, as during a football game he's just kind of on the outer gates looking in, while Sarah's on the inside acting as the mascot for the game. As such, as Wirt's watching all this, Greg comes up after he helped the old lady, and Greg, being Greg, sees Wirt with the tape and realizes it's for Sarah, and when he asks to look at it, he immediately decides he wants to run into the game and give it to her, with Wirt chasing after to try and stop him. However, they're both intercepted by a group of kids who end up seeing the tape and are able to rightfully guess that it's for Sarah. Wirt, being Wirt, tries to just kind of brush it off. He's like, no, it's not really for Sarah. It's for a different Sarah. It's not really anything. And as he starts freaking out and the kids keep poking and prodding him about the tape being for Sarah, Wirt just keeps getting more and more flustered until ultimately things come to a head when they mention how Sarah's going to be going to a party afterwards, and apparently the titular Jason Funderburger wants to ask her out. As such, when Wirt hears this, he just kind of gives up, and he and Greg end up leaving. And so, as Wirt and Greg are just kind of wandering off, Wirt continues lamenting his lost love and all that BS until he realizes that he didn't get the tape back. As such, they end up running back to the football field after the game is over, and Wirt asked the kids what happened to the tape, and they mentioned how they put it in Sarah's jacket because at that time after the game she went into a dressing room to get changed. As such, Wirt goes to try and get the tape back, but unfortunately he's stopped. Unfortunately, a football player sees him and mistakes him for a creep, so he ends up running off before grabbing the tape, and Sarah comes out, and when Sarah comes out, dressed in a skeleton clown costume, she ends up takes her jacket anyway, and ends up just riding off to the party, forcing Wirt and Greg to follow. As such, Wirt doesn't originally want to go in the party because he apparently wasn't invited, but Greg, being the sociable type, goes in, and sure enough, he's able to get them in, so both boys go inside, and so sure enough, Wirt does eventually run into Sarah, and what I like is that from the outset, it's clear that Sarah likes Wirt because apparently she was asking people if Wirt was going to be at the party, and so Wirt's clearly flustered with her. She's clearly a lot more friendly and cordial with Wirt, but their conversation gets cut short as we actually see the titular Jason Funderburger. And yeah, it's clear all of Wirt's problems with him were in his head, because Jason Funderburger is kind of a loser. Like, he looks kind of like he's got a stick up his ass. He talks like this the whole time. He really is not the big Casanova that Wirt thinks he is. He just kind of seems weird, kind of impish, kind of like just not really a non-threat in many cases. And while Sarah is nice to Jason, it's clear she is not interested in him, especially when later in the episode he tries to make a move and she just tells him, "Can you get your hand off mine?" I do like that. It's clear that Sarah has no interest in Jason at all, but Wirt being Wirt, he still sees him as a threat, and so but ultimately Jason arriving at all. Sorry, dog. As Jason arrives at all, he reminds Sarah that apparently them and a bunch of other kids are going to be going to a graveyard later to continue the party, and Sarah does initially invite Wirt, but Wirt says that he probably shouldn't go. As such, Sarah and Jason end up leaving. Sorry again, dog. And so Wirt initially does still try to write it off until he remembers, oh shit, I didn't get the tape back, and so he and Greg end up going to the cemetery, and they try to remain hidden as they see all the kids just kind of having fun, and Wirt being Wirt, he keeps making up scenarios and saying, "Oh, it's too late." But Greg says that he could go in there and cause a distraction, allowing Wirt to get in closer, and Wirt doesn't originally want to do it until he sees Jason doing the aforementioned move I talked about before, and so he encourages Greg to do it. But as Greg gets the group's attention, they ask if Wirt's there as well, and Greg just points them right to Wirt's direction, causing him to continue freaking out. However, before Wirt can further screw everything up, the party gets interrupted by a cop car arriving. I mean, he's not there to arrest them. He's just there to give them a scare. But it does cause the group to spread out throughout the cemetery, with Wirt and Greg climbing a tree and climbing on top of the wall surrounding the cemetery. The guy tells them to get down, they could hurt themselves, but from atop the wall, Wirt ends up seeing Jason and Sarah as they're hiding behind a tombstone, and Sarah ends up finding the tape. As such, when Wirt sees this, he says, "It's all over. We're done. I've lost." And so he ends up jumping off the wall onto the other side, with Greg following after. As such, Wirt just starts freaking out, and he immediately just starts blaming Greg for all this, saying, "If you and your stupid father didn't keep pushing me, none of this would happen." But Greg, being Greg, he just kind of rolls with it and winds up ultimately just forgetting everything as he hears more croaking, and sure enough, that's where he finds the frog. As he finds him in a nearby bush. As such, Wirt is still not in a good mood, and even when Greg says, "Well, what should we name the frog?" Wirt tells him, "No, I don't care. Name him whatever you want." But however, throughout this, they suddenly hear a noise, a rumbling. And soon Wirt and Greg realize where they are. They're on train tracks! And a train is coming right at them. As such, obviously not being stupid, the boys end up jumping out of the way of the train, but sadly these tracks are located just above a ravine. And so as both boys jump out of the way, they end up rolling down the ravine into a lake. And upon falling into the lake, both boys pass out. Yep. Essentially, this entire trip into the unknown is essentially a fever dream as these boys are slowly drowning. Ain't that lovely? But ultimately, we can kind of forget that dark reality at the moment, as back in the unknown, Greg finally wakes up, and it turns out that after he passed out earlier, Beatrice dropped him and the frog off in front of her family's, I'm just going to call it, nesting tree. As such, her family took Wirt in, and Wirt initially begins wondering where the heck his brother is, and he initially mistakes Beatrice's mother for Beatrice, but when Wirt's told that he and the frog were the only ones out there, Wirt decides he has to go back out there and find Greg. And while Beatrice's mom tries to dissuade him from going because it's still snowing out there and he could die, Wirt pretty much says, "No, I've got to do it. I need to find him. Find him." And as such, while Beatrice's mother thinks it might not be a good idea, she doesn't stop him and even tells Wirt that if he happens to see Beatrice, give her a hug from her family, which Wirt says he will, and the episode ends with him going off to find Greg. Which is where the unknown picks up, as we cut to Beatrice as she's flying through the woods trying to find Greg, and she does eventually find him as he's talking with the beast, and, well, Greg does not look well. His eyes are sunken in, and his skin is pale, and while his attitude is just as jovial as ever, it's clear that he's not in the best physical health. Not helped by the fact that the beast is clearly trying to either break his will or tire him out, because the beast has been having him go out and gather a bunch of objects that realistically he should not have been able to grab. Again, sorry, dog, right there. In this case, he wanted him to grab a silver spool, which Greg ends up getting a proxy for with spider silk. He wants him to get the beast wants Greg to get a golden comb, so he gets a honeycomb, which is honey's technically gold. And so the last thing the beast wants is the sun in a cup. And so Greg, while initially finding this impossible, thinks he's found the solution as he places the cup on a tree trunk and says that as the day goes on, the sun will eventually lower into the cup and he'll grab it. And the beast is all for the solution because, well, either he will give up because he will believe it's hopeless, or, hypothermia will set in because he's sitting in the middle of the woods in the middle of a snowstorm. So, kind of screwed either way. But ultimately, Beatrice is not able to go in and save Greg because the wind from the storm blows her off course. Thankfully, though, she does end up running into Wirt as he's still wandering about. As such, Wirt finds Beatrice, and Beatrice tries to direct him to where she found Greg. But as they're wandering around, like, we end up cutting back to the woodsman as he's back in his home trying to find edelwood bark so he can make oil. And while he does initially find a few twigs and tries grinding them down, that process gets interrupted when he begins hearing the beast singing. Sorry, I'm kind of just weary, okay? And so, as such, he takes the lantern and goes out to the woods, and he ends up finding the beast, who says he has a present for him. Greg, who is in the process of being turned into an edelwood tree, clearly farther along than Wirt was, as he's about half of his body is stuck in a edelwood trunk. The woodsman is horrified by this and does not want to harvest the kid. But the beast reminds the woodsman that this is the duty he undertook because he needed edelwood. He needs edelwood oil if he wants to keep the lantern lit and keep his daughter's soul blazing. And on top of that, he's been doing this for years. Why is it now he's suddenly having problems with it? Which the woodsman ends up saying, "No, I didn't know that this is what was going on." Which I'd say, dude, you were doing this for years. I think at some point you should realize that you should be wondering where all these special trees are coming from. But the point is, the woodsman does not want to have Greg be the next edelwood tree to light the lantern, and as he goes to help Greg out, he puts the lantern down, and the beast tries to make a grab for it, but the woodsman sees this, grabs it, and ends up taking his axe, and finally decides, you know what, screw you, and as he goes to engage the beast in a fight. We don't really get to see the conclusion of that because we end up cutting back to Wirt and Beatrice as they're still wandering about, and as they're wandering through, they end up seeing the light from the lantern by Greg, and as they follow it, they still find Greg as he's stuck as an edelwood tree. As such, but however, by Greg, they find, I think, the woodsman's axe and his lantern, but no woodsman. As such, Wirt goes up to Greg and he tries to free him from it, but it's clear Greg is on his last legs here, and before he disappears, he wants Wirt to do something for him. You see, the rock I mentioned, which I didn't mention in any of my plot summaries because I felt it wasn't really that important, that rock apparently was not given to Greg, he stole it from the old lady, and he wants Wirt to give it back to her, but Wirt is not having any of it, and says no, they'll get out. Like him, Greg, and the frog, which he ends up naming Jason Funderburger, are going to get out of here. And Greg is finally happy that they finally settled on the name of the frog before he ends up passing out. Before Wirt can further help can rip any more bark off of Greg, the beast ends up coming back onto the scene with the heap of the woodsman, who's not dead but clearly beaten and bruised. As such, Wirt, who's been using the lantern, who is using the lantern as a light, pretty much tells the beast to back off. He's going to get his brother and go home, but the beast says, no, he's mine now. He's turning into an edelwood tree. There's no hope for him. But Wirt is not taking no for an answer and wants to help him. And so the beast decides, fine, how about we make a deal then? I'll take your brother's soul and place it in the lantern, and you can take up the woodsman's job. Keep the lantern lit, and your brother's soul will stay alive within it. And at first, Wirt almost takes the deal, as he believes is the only way to save his brother. Until Wirt realizes something. That's dumb. Like, why would he do that? Why would he spend the next few years of his life wandering through the woods to keep this lantern lit? Why would he waste his time like that? Why should he go to all this effort? And on top of that, why does the beast care? Why is he so concerned with keeping this lantern lit? It's not like he owns it anymore. The lantern should not be his priority. It's almost like the lantern has his soul in it. And the instant Wirt posits that potential theory, the beast gets a bit more aggressive as suddenly almost all the light is drained from the area, and the beast threatens to show Wirt true darkness. And Wirt says, "Are you?" before opening up the lantern casing and lightly blowing on the flame, which is enough to cause the beast to back off. As such, Wirt realizes that the beast is just... As such, when the woodsman right there quickly realizes that the beast had been screwing with him for all these years, and that the lantern never held his daughter's soul, And as such, Wirt ends up giving the woodsman back the lantern and tells him, do whatever you want with this. And so Wirt ends up taking the woodsman's axe and uses the axe to free his brother from the Edelwood bark. In the meantime, as the woodsman's holding the lantern, Wirt turns to Beatrice and tells her that he's got to get his brother home, that that Beatrice should go back to her family. Beatrice at first says, "I can't do that. I can't face them with everything I've done with their transformation being my fault." And Wirt responds by giving her the scissors that Adelaide had, as he confirms he took them and he was holding on to them because he was angry at Beatrice. But Beatrice doesn't really care about that. If anything, she's just happy to see them, and she gives she gives Wirt a goodbye hug. I keep getting their names mixed up. I'm so sorry. She gives Wirt a goodbye hug, but in the meantime, the woodsman is holding the lantern, and the beast is now just starting to freak out, saying, you know the truth now. You see that any who are lost in the unknown are turned to Edelwood trees. It's your job to chop them down. But at this point, the woodsman doesn't care anymore. He realizes he's been had, and he is now angry at the beast. And so as the beast keeps begging him, trying to bargain with him, saying, "No, don't you care about your daughter? Don't you have to keep the lantern lit?" The woodsman just pretty much finally has enough of it, and we actually do get a rather creepy blink and you'll miss it shot as he shines the lantern on the beast, and you actually see what it looks like for a split second, which I'll talk about later when I summarize my thoughts on the characters and so forth. But put simply, it's creepy, and if you have trypophobia, you might want to not look it up. But put simply, the woodsman finally has had enough of the beast's crap, opens up the lantern, and blows out the light. And as darkness consumes the area, you can hear the beast's dying scream. It's really creepy, and ultimately the last words you hear in the dark are Wirt and Beatrice saying goodbye to one another before Wirt wakes up back in the real world and grabs his brother and takes him and the frog to the shores of the lake. And thankfully, the kids of the party were looking for them, and they see them come to the shore. But as Wirt calls out to them, he ends up passing out, and ultimately an ambulance is called, and Wirt and Gregor rush to the hospital, and Wirt ends up waking up in a bed with Sarah standing over him. We're just glad he's okay. As such, she ends up handing Wirt back the tape because I'm guessing her friends probably told her that Wirt made the tape, but as they're talking, we see that Greg's already up and about, and he's telling everybody about the adventures they had, and it's clearly just a nice little thing to show everything that everything is fine, and Sarah says that she wouldn't have been able to listen to the tape anyway. She doesn't have a tape player, and she's about to ask Wirt if they could listen to it at his house, which Wirt immediately answers yes to before she even gets a chance to finish her question. Though he says that maybe they should work up to the tape first. So all's well that ends well, and there's some hint that maybe the unknown may have been a real place because Greg is shaking Jason Funderburker the frog around, and he's still glowing because of the bell. And as such, the episode ends with our narrator wrapping everything up, playing out a little tune, and it turns out that the narrator was actually the frog, or it was Jason Funderburker the frog. And so we end up cutting back to the unknown as we see all the people that Wirt and Greg interacted with as their lives are now better. We see the woodsman living in a cabin alone by himself until his daughter comes out, somehow brought back to life. I guess the beast wasn't entirely lying about her soul being in the lantern. We see Beatrice and her family now human again, and they're now living back in their home, which it turns out was the mill that the woodsman used to turn Edelwood bark into oil. We see the people of Pottsfield as they're wrapping up their celebrations. We see the teacher and her fiancé as they're at a circus enjoying themselves. We see Auntie Whispers and Larna as they're just sitting around having a cup of tea. We see who else is there? Oh yeah, we see a new portrait of the old man who was selling tea as he's posing with a horse with I'm guessing his wife now looking up at him fondly. And so the episode finally ends with the frog finishing up the piano piece and closing everything out on a happy note. So, yeah, that was Over the Garden Wall. And before I give my thoughts on the series, I want to give my thoughts on these episodes. And of course, we should start with Into the Unknown. What I like about this episode is it not only works as an origin episode, but it also kind of works as a reflection on the characters, specifically on Wirt. One of the things that I think because, well, as all good stories are, Wirt is not the same person that he was. Is not the same person as he was at the beginning of the series, and this episode does a good job at showcasing just how far he's come. As throughout this whole episode, we see Wirt prior to going into the unknown, and well, like Beatrice said in the Lullaby in Frogland episode, he was kind of a loser. Like, at every opportunity in the episode, when he wants to go talk to Sarah, he gets in his own way. When he sees Sarah dancing out by the football field in her mascot costume, he doesn't muster up the courage to go and just say something to her. And when he finally does go forward, it's only because Greg ran ahead first. When he learns that Jason Funderburger wants to ask out Sarah, he immediately takes that as a sign of defeat and runs. And the only reason he ends up going back is because he realized he left the tape behind, and he's embarrassed at its contents because it apparently only has poetry and him playing the clarinet. But at every opportunity, he keeps getting in his own way. When he wants to go and see Sarah to get the tape back, he doesn't go into the party because he wasn't invited to it. When he actually does go to talk to Sarah, the instant Jason Funderburger shows up, he just gets all grumpy, like, Jason Funderburger. When he goes to the cemetery, his intent is just to quickly grab the tape and run, while Greg acts as a distraction. But again, he keeps getting nervous whenever attention is drawn to him, and then finally when he sees Sarah with the tape, he immediately takes that as a sign of defeat and runs away. And he blames all the shortcomings on Greg. Which honestly does get to me, but one, he's still a kid, so maybe you can get away with it. But at the same time, Greg did not do anything. At best, the worst thing that Greg did in this whole thing was push Wirt forward, because Wirt kept holding himself back, and so he wound up using Greg as a scapegoat for all of his problems, and it showcases who Wirt was at the beginning of the series versus who he was at the end, because throughout this whole thing, he just seems to be a bit player in his own life. And every time an opportunity comes to further push it along, he just says, no, I can't do it. I'm just going to stay back here. It's clear that Wirt at the beginning of the series was, well, a worrywart, which he was. When we first saw him in the old grist mill, he was freaking out about them being in the unknown. He kept trying to be more cautious about things. He kept second-guessing himself. And we see that consistently throughout this episode. But again, it does well in showcasing how far he's come when he ends up waking up back in the unknown. Because when you see Wirt in the unknown, he immediately's like, where's my brother? I gotta go find him. And he, instead of talking himself out of it, he realizes, I gotta go find him. He's my brother, and I can't just let him die out here. And even when other arguments are positive for why he shouldn't go out there, like it's in the middle of a storm and he could die, and he wouldn't be any good to Greg if he was dead, Wirt would say, I wasn't really good with him that much before either. It shows his development, that for everything, that despite his hopelessness, being in the unknown did make him better. His adventures did make him stronger, made him more assertive, actually made him start taking responsibility for things, which I'll get more into when I talk about the characters and so forth. But needless to say, I do like how that works. I think it does well in showcasing Wirt's character growth throughout the show, and does a nice way of reflecting it by just kind of help showcasing who he was before entering the unknown, which I like. And speaking of which, like I said, it is nice to learn how they came into the unknown and learning what time period they're in. There's still some nice little jokes thrown in for the sake of having this be a kids show, but at the same time, when we finally learn how Wirt and Greg got into the unknown, namely by it potentially being a dying dream as they drown to death, it kind of creates a sense of urgency through it and paints a lot of the earlier adventures in this series in a different light. It also explains a lot of the oddities about it, because the unknown essentially through this, where the unknown is presented as two possibilities. It could be either a dying dream that Wirt and Greg are having, or it could be just something else, a different plane of existence, potentially purgatory, which both explanations would explain all the strange and odd things that they come across. But ultimately, it's not, but ultimately we don't really get any clear answers on that. I'll talk about that at the end of the when I get some of my thoughts on the series. But needless to say, it does create a sense of urgency because as you realize that throughout all these fun adventures, throughout all them having fun and all the jokes and all the weird and scary things, in the real world, Wirt and Greg are slowly dying, and thus you kind of want to see them get out of this okay. So kind of a big thing there, but. On top of that, it also explains a lot of a few other things, like how they came across the frog, the candy in Greg's pants, etc. And it gives more context to Wirt's story about trying to get with the girl. But overall, it's still a good episode. Does well in explaining everything, while showcasing how far Wirt's character has come, while also setting the stage for the final episode. And sure enough, let's talk about that one. The Unknown, I think, is actually a really good finale for the series, and it does how it works as a finale is it not only caps off Wirt and Greg's own distinctive journeys, but also gives us an honestly interesting and satisfying ending to the battle with the Beast. It ultimately feels like it doesn't end with a bang, but with a whimper, because the Beast, despite being this imposing force that Wirt and Greg have been essentially have been trying to run away from throughout the whole series. When you actually meet him, he's still just as quiet and cunning as he is from the beginning. How he manages to get Greg to turn into an Edelwood tree is not by beating him down, but is not by fighting him, but by just whittling him down, doing tasks that he shouldn't be able to do, making him sick in the woods, and ultimately getting him to a point where he is so unwell that he is slowly turning into an Edelwood tree. It's very conniving and very deceitful, especially when you learn that he uses the lantern not just as a means of survival, but also as a bargaining chip, tricking people into safeguarding it because, well, it could hold the souls of their loved ones. It's honestly very creepy, and I think actually works well for the series. Actually works well for the series and for the Beast as a villain. On top of that, how it caps off the character journeys is the lengths that Wirt and Greg are going to for each other. Greg is willingly let himself become the Beast's pawn just so that he can find a way to get himself and Wirt home. And Wirt, when he's confronted by the Beast and the Beast gives him the whole, you can have his soul in the lantern and then you can have his soul in the lantern and take on the mantle. Wirt almost takes it up, but knocks it down because he realizes, wait, no, I don't have to do that. I don't have to listen to you at all. He actually uses his brain, and when the Beast tries threatening him to try and get him to comply, well, Wirt just immediately throws it back in his face by calling his bluff and almost putting out the lantern. So yeah, I do like that. Again, it helps showcase everything coming together as he shows no fear in the face of danger, that he's ready to run in, damn the consequences, and it helps too when he finally when he and Beatrice are finally able to talk again. And what I like is that there's no ill will anymore. He's actually talking to Beatrice. They're sharing information. He trusts her enough to guide him to Greg, and when he finally does get to Greg and he and Beatrice say their goodbyes, he gives her the scissors because he knows that these are important to her and they can help her family. It's sweet, it's nice, and it does well in capping everything off. I do love that, and it's exemplified when Wirt and Greg finally wake up back in the real world, as when Wirt is talking with Sarah. He instead of letting Sarah finish the question, he actually answers it right away, showing more assertiveness, though clearly still some nervousness because, again, the tape is still pretty embarrassing. So, I like that, and I do like how it rounds everything up with showcasing that Wirt and Greg's journey throughout the Unknown did lead to some positive changes in the lives of everybody they met. It's sweet, and it's nice, and again, the Beast defeat is honestly very cathartic. It may not be as spectacular as a lot of other villain deaths, but at the very least, it does feel satisfying seeing this rather hoity, quiet, and deceitful being finally get their comeuppance, and all it took was just someone blowing out the flame on a lantern. And the look the woodsman gives him when he finally blows it out is really nice, and it's just a look of pure screw you energy, and I love it. So Overall, both episodes I think are very much well done. Into the Unknown is a nice way of setting up the finale while also not only explaining the origins but also showcasing how far the characters have come, or in this case, work. While the Unknown, I think, does a good job at capping everything off, having all the character journeys come to a head, having a final confrontation with the Beast, having an I honestly think somewhat interesting way of defeating him, while also showcasing everybody having a happy ending and going on their way to enjoy said happy ending, as well as having it end with the frog playing the piano. So overall, I think they're sweet, and honestly, I think that's the best way I can describe Over the Garden Wall. It's an honestly sweet and heartfelt series. I'm not going to claim that it's perfect. I'm not going to claim that, and I might end up pissing someone off by saying that because when I first saw the series, while I wasn't having a bad time, it wasn't really sticking out to me as the big grand thing that everybody talked about it as. Because, well, this thing won an Emmy, was nominated and won an Emmy award, and yet when I watched it, I thought, this doesn't really feel that different from other kids' cartoons. It really just kind of feels just zany and weird. It just kind of has the nice little zaniness to it, and while I think it did have more depth to it when it revealed the twist with Beatrice and so forth, at the same time, it didn't really see the full appeal of it, if that makes any sense. I didn't hate it, but at the same time, I did enjoy it, but at the same time, it didn't really feel like as big a thing that everybody built it up to be. But at the same time, and on top of that, I think part of the problem for me was, as usual, you go in with no context. You're just shown Wirt and Greg as they enter the unknown, and all you really know is that they're just is that they're just lost. You're not really given enough time to get to know the characters, but like all good series, as you keep going with it, you do start learning more about them, and through the adventures, you do start to care about these kids and not want to see anything bad happen to them, which I think is a good thing and works for the series. It's just that when you don't really have a lot of context to it, at the same time, it feels like you're just kind of getting thrown in without really any build-up, which did get to me a little. And another problem that I kind of had a problem with the series, it felt rushed in certain regards. Now, this might be because it was a 10 episode miniseries, but for me, but for me, at several points in the series, it felt like that a lot of the stories they had were just trying to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. It didn't hinder my enjoyment a lot, but it was noticeable. And the way it kept going about it, it made it feel like certain scenes that should have had more tension to them or should have had more emotional weight, they felt a little too light for my taste. They didn't ruin them by any means. Like it still had plenty of emotion, and there was still plenty of good twists in there to make me invested, especially with the whole theme of things are not always what they seem. And on top of that, there were still emotional weights, as some things were still given enough weight and time to have them matter, such as with Beatrice's character arc and Wirt and Greg's own character arcs. But at the same time, when you have a series that's made up of 11-minute episodes and only goes for 10 minutes, it kind of does lead to some stories being rushed, and sadly Over the Garden Wall had that a few times, as certain episodes really did not felt like they should have been longer and should have had more time to breathe, but sadly because of their 11-minute runtime of the episodes, it kind of led to things feeling a little rushed in some regards. I think one example potentially being the episode with the old man who had the tea company. It felt like in that episode that it should have been a little bit longer than it should have been, that they should have had more time to build up the mystery and so forth, or potentially maybe the penultimate episode with Babes in the Wood. That felt like it should have had more time to it. Instead, it felt like it was just kind of rushing through things a little. As a result, while it didn't ruin the story for me, at the same time it was noticeable and did hamper my enjoyment a little, because quite honestly, despite those flaws, though, I think Over the Garden Wall is a really good miniseries, and quite honestly, rewatching it now, I can see why it's gotten the acclaim it has, because, well, it's a nice little story. It's a nice little adventure story, a nice little spooky trip to take you that you can watch around Halloween because, well, at its heart, it really is just two pairs of boys wandering around and wandering a strange land, trying to find their way home, and the various misadventures they have along the way. The fun, and on top of, and what makes it better too is that it, while it does definitely not shy away from some of the more serious topics and aspects of their story, it also it also knows how to keep things lighthearted and fun. There's throughout the whole series, there despite the strange oddities that Wirt and Greg encounter, there's always a sense of fun whimsy. When they enter Pottsfield and see all the people in pumpkin costumes with a big pumpkin thing in the center, which apparently was being piloted by a cat, it creates a sense of unease, but then you still get the whimsy when you see how everyone is reacting, seeing them joking around, and learning the punishment that when Wirt and Greg's punishment are being going to be punished for their crimes, it's really just community service, which I think is kind of funny. That was fun. Throughout all the and when they see all the and when Wirt and Greg encounter all these weird, strange, and scary things, at the end of the day, and when they take a closer an examination of these things, they're not as threatening as they seem. At the same time, though, they also are still kept on their toes because they do still encounter some legitimate threats that do force them to think on their toes. But how they come out of them does actually feel fun. When they encounter Lorna and Auntie Whispers, it's actually kind of nice to see them think on their toes and figure out how they're able to overpower Lorna and free her. When they're running away from the frog police, that was a fun time overall. That was a fun time overall and was still a memorable scene. When they're helping the old man with the mystery of his haunted mansion, it does create a sense of unease, but then actually creates a sense of nice warm emotion when you learn who his ghost really was. And throughout the whole, and even with Beatrice, when you learn why she was lying to Wirt and Greg, you do sympathize with her, especially since it's clear that she doesn't want Wirt and Greg to come to any harm. Then that's just kind of a nice little thing. The series knows how to mix the strange and surreal with the fun and whimsical, creating a nice mishmash of the two that entices you to enter it, but to be on your wits. It doesn't it makes it clear that you're not entirely in danger, but you shouldn't let your guard down either, which is what the Unknown seems to be. As throughout the entire Unknown, there are sights strange to behold, but you also got to be wary of which sites are safe and which are not, as even the sites that aren't safe may not be entirely that may seem safe may not be entirely friendly, or the sites that may seem very hostile might actually be more welcoming than you think. And I think that's a nice little theme that goes throughout the series, that things are not as they seem, and that's constantly showcased throughout the show. In the beginning, they encounter a creepy woodsman who they think is a threat, but turns out to be a nice guy. Even when they change their opinion later, it turns out he's just as much a victim it turns out he's just as much a victim as anybody else. When they enter Pottsfield and see how creepy it is, in the end, it turns out Pottsfield, despite its creepy nature, is very welcoming and full of nice people. When they encounter when they encounter Auntie Whispers and Lorna, at first it seems very open and shut. Auntie Whispers is the scary old lady trapping Lorna and keeping her busy. When in reality, Auntie Whispers actually cared deeply for Lorna and wanted to help her, while Lorna was the thing that she was trying to keep everybody else away from because she was possessed. Or even with Beatrice and how she seemed welcoming and nice in the beginning, but was leading Wirt and Greg into a trap. It's just it always has a sense, it always, throughout the whole thing, throughout the whole series, there's a theme of expect the unexpected. Don't judge a book by its cover, but of not judging a book by its cover. And it's very interesting to see implemented throughout the series and with how everything comes together, because that entire theme even spreads to the story, as throughout the whole series, it looks as though Wirt and Greg are just wandering throughout this strange land. But in reality, when you learn that this whole thing may just be that it could be a dying dream, it makes it clear that things are not what they seem. They may be in the unknown. They're wandering through the unknown, but what is the unknown really? I like that, and I like seeing that, and I like seeing that, and to help exemplify that sense of unease and whimsy are just the designs of the unknown. The unknown is not just one central location. It's not just a big barren woodland. There are a lot of varied and nice locations to it, and all of them really do kind of fit the mood. When Wirt and Greg first enter the unknown, it's dark and gloomy and mysterious. But yet, as they continue traveling around it and day comes, we suddenly get nice autumn colors that make you feel welcoming, especially when they enter Pottsfield and see the denizens. When they travel to the part of the woods with the schoolhouse, things are a lot more lighter and chipper and fun and nicer. But then when it gets to the dark, stormy night, it really feels intimidating. You can feel the weight. When they enter the old man's mansion, it feels dark, gloomy, and mysterious, befitting of what's happening with the old man and his deteriorating sanity, and especially when he thinks he's being haunted. But then but then in the next episode, things get lighter when they're on the ferry. The mood keeps shifting and changing and varies depending on what's going on with the main characters. When they're downtrodden, suddenly it's dark and gloomy. When they give up hope, that's when the snow starts falling. And ultimately, it just is a nice little way of using the environment to convey emotion. And all the environments are all uniquely designed and varied and interesting to look at. And I like that. I think it really does work well. And considering that this place may be a dying dream, it makes sense how Wirt and Greg's moods would have an effect on the environments. I like that. I think it's really nice. I think it really does well. And on top of that, another thing that works about the series are the characters. Each of them have their own unique, interesting arcs, and I'm going to talk about them. And starting with them, of course, I'm going to start with Wirt. Wirt's character arc was essentially to get out of his own way, to take responsibility for his actions and ultimately do something about them. Because at the beginning of the series and into the unknown episode, Wirt was, like I said, a worrywart. He was constantly thinking of the worst case scenario and acted as if that was the scenario that was guaranteed. That if he hit a roadblock, then that was the end. And if something happened that made a situation worse, rather than accepting responsibility for those actions, he would push them off onto something else. He would blame someone else. And it wasn't just Greg. When he was nervous about talking to Sarah, once he learned that Jason Funderburger was interested in Sarah as well, he immediately just backed off. When he met Jason Funderburger, despite the fact that Jason was honestly a non-threat, he still treated him as like this big Casanova that wanted to steal Sarah away from him, and he acted as such. When Sarah finally found the tape, he immediately blamed Greg for what happened. And in the first episode, and when Wirt started losing hope, he said that this was all him being trapped in the unknown and all the circumstances were all Greg's fault. He had a problem with shifting the blame, not taking responsibility, and just essentially being his own worst enemy. He would constantly second guess himself. He would constantly keep holding himself back. And if someone pushed him forward, he would resist. And if something continued going wrong, he would keep shifting the blame. He was his own worst enemy, and he refused to see it. But as he traveled through the unknown, we saw him getting more assertive. We saw him actually taking more responsibility. We saw him actually acting more responsible. When when Beatrice called him a pushover, he intentionally started being stagnant, which in turn helped kind of make him much more, I think, helped strengthen his character. When he went to the inn and everyone kept trying to prod him to explain himself more, he became more assertive, and when he heard his friend was in danger, he rushed off to help her. When Greg and Beatrice were at the old man's mansion, he actually did examine mysteries and did keep poke. And when he learned that Beatrice had her own story, he began asking more questions. And the more the journey went along, the more Greg grew. Yes, he did briefly backpedal when he learned that Beatrice had been lying to them and been leading them into a trap. But even then, he was still being more active. He tried pushing Lorna to run away from Auntie Whispers when he thought she was in danger. When they were ultimately being quartered, when he learned what had happened, when he learned how Auntie Whispers was keeping Lorna in check, he immediately used that to his advantage to get her to back off and free her. And at the end, ultimately him finally accepting that he had no idea where they were, yeah, that could be easily the worst backpedal. That you could see that as a bit of backpedal, but it also could be seen as him accepting his own limitations. Yes, in his hopelessness, he does start blaming Greg a little bit again. But the instant Greg is in any form of danger, Wirt immediately is like, "Oh shit, I have to find him." And on top of that, combined with his dream where he saw how he and Greg entered the unknown, it finally kind of made him. It probably made him real. It probably helped him realize, yeah, I was kind of an asshole. Greg deserves better. I need to make things right. And when he finally does wake up, he is taking a bit more initiative when he finally talks to Sarah, and they agree to essentially go on an impromptu date. I like that. It's a good character journey and is a nice little coming of age story of seeing a kid who constantly is a bit of a worrier become more assertive, more confident in themselves, and ultimately taking the steps necessary to essentially allow themselves to grow. And I think another way it's exemplified is when he finally confronts the Beast, as he almost kowtows to the Beast's demands before he realizes, no, wait, you're stupid, and actually is smart and real and actually does put the pieces together and realizes that the Beast is more implicitly tied to this lantern than he's led to believe, which I like. And it's even, and again, it leads to an honestly badass moment when the Beast tries to intimidate Wirt, and Wirt's response is, "Want me to blow this up? I'll blow it up." And I love that. I think that's nice, and it's a good little cap off to his character arc. So there you go. Then you have Greg I don't really think had a character arc throughout the series. He was a Cloud Cuckoo Lander and very much an extroverted personality at the beginning of the series, and he was a Cloud Cuckoo Lander and had an extroverted personality at the end. He had a bit. Greg's biggest character flaw, I think, was his. Well, I say character flaw. It's a double-edged sword, I think. The double-edged sword of his personality was that he was very much a very open book. He always spoke his mind, didn't really have much of a filter, but he was always a friendly, fun kid to begin with. He liked talking with people. He liked sharing things with people. And on top of that, if he saw someone as a threat, he would repeat it and say, "Okay, so what should we do to take him out?" And yeah, as a kid, he would make a lot of silly mistakes. Though, as the Woodsman pointed out at the beginning of the series, since Wirt's the older brother, it was his responsibility to keep Greg in check. But at the same time, what makes it work, in my opinion, is that naivete and innocence also works to showcase his heart, as he always wants to make things right. He wants to do the best for any situation, and sometimes that will lead to him doing some stupid things, but he never means any harm. Honestly, the worst conscious decision he ever made throughout the series was stealing the old lady's rock, and by the end of the series, he regretted doing that and wanted Wirt to return it for him if he died in the unknown. Otherwise, Greg did everything in his power to make the world a better place wherever he went. In the Schooltown Follies episode, when Beatrice told him the world's an ugly place, you just gotta get used to it, his response to that is, "Well, then I'll make it a brighter place." When he wants to see, when he learned that his frog when he compared the Jason Funderburger frog to the rest of the frogs on the ferry in the Lullaby in Frogland episode, he was worried that he wasn't doing enough for the frog, and thus when the frog was handed a deal for a better life, he was willing to let him go. Even when the duo learned that Beatrice had betrayed them, he still trusted her. He still saw her as a friend, but he still went along with what Wirt wanted because Wirt was his older brother, and he wanted to do his best for him. And I think that helps exemplify Greg's final decision at the end of the episode, when he sees that Wirt is in danger, when he sees that Wirt in his hopelessness is about to give himself over to the Beast. It really does show without hesitating, he hands himself over to the Beast on the chance that it will save his brother. And quite honestly, I think that's sweet. It showcases his heart, and it showcases that despite the risks in doing this, he still willingly does it. And even as the Beast keeps wearing him down physically, he still does the jobs he's given jovially. And honestly, I like that. I think it works. And as a result, I feel like Greg didn't really need any character development in this series. He was a jovial character at the beginning, he was a jovial character at the end. Yes, that innocence and naivete could be annoying, but on the flip side of that, it showcased an innocence and a purity to him that ultimately made you actually warm up to him, and by the end, when he almost got turned into an Edelwood tree, it made you more desperately want to see him come out okay. It's not the same goes for Wirt. And then, of course, you have Beatrice's character arc. I think Beatrice's character arc is the most complex out of them. As from the beginning, she's not a kid. Like, she's young in comparison to her family, but she's clearly older than Wirt and Greg. Maybe a little bit older than Wirt, maybe around the same age, but don't quote me on that. But put simply, her character arc was mostly about accepting her own shortcomings and making up for her mistakes. And throughout the series, she was a bit of a had a shifty and snide personality to her. Like, she would, like, if she thought something was stupid, she would tell you that it was stupid and mess with you if she could. And she would be quick to insult you if she thought you were being dumb. At the same time, despite her shifty personality, it's clear that she also had a heart. She was a very, like, case in point, let's talk about her bird form. As a because from the outset, when she and her family returned to Bluebird, she accepted her responsibility. She accepted her part in the blame for what happened, and as a result, she made it her mission to ultimately not go back to her family until she found a way to free them from the ramifications of her mistake. And likewise, when she tricked Wirt and Greg into going with her to Adelaide's, in the end, she wanted to make things right again, and even when they abandoned her, she still sought them out because she wanted to make sure they were safe. I think that was the best part of her character, but at the same time, it's still clear that she was growing. And while she did her best to make up for her mistakes, in the process of trying to fix them, she was willing to compromise her morals a bit. Case in point, while she clearly regretted what happened to her family, at the same time, in her desperation to try and free them from her mistake, she was willing to cross a few moral lines. In the case such as when she was willing to trade Wirt and Greg to Adelaide for the scissors, even though that meant that they would have a life of eternal servitude to Adelaide. And like what, on top of that, she was also very much quick to lie to them, and when the instant she found them, she was quick to do that. But at the same time, a flip side of this is also her growth. Because while she made plenty of mistakes in her life, when she realized that she made those mistakes, she didn't rest until she made them right. Case in point, going back to when she turned her family into bluebirds, she swore she wouldn't go back to them till she found a way to fix them. And while looking for that solution led her to tricking Wirt and Greg, then when she finally got to know Wirt and Greg, she began to realize, I can't sacrifice these kids for my own benefit, and immediately she tried to fix that mistake. And when that kind of backfired, she still kept going. She sought out Wirt and Greg. She saved Greg from freezing to death in a cold lake. And when she learned that Greg was out there with the beast, she went to search for him while she left Wirt in the care of her family. In the end, throughout their adventures, she made plenty of mistakes. She also never stopped trying to fix them. And while she would sometimes do a few things that would be considered unethical, like again with the aforementioned lying to Wirt and Greg, or when she wanted to con the old man out of money so that Wirt and Greg could have fare for the ferry, at the same time, it also showed the strength of her character, that while she did make mistakes and cross a few moral boundaries, at the same time there was still a heart there, and for every mistake she made, she always strove to make it better, even at her own detriment, even if it meant putting herself on the line, like when she said she would never go back to her family until she could find a way to fix them, or when she tried to find Wirt and Greg to make things better with them. She would go the extra mile to fix any problems she came across, or any problems she caused. And honestly, I think it was a nice little character arc that definitely showed quite a few layers to her. That she could be shifty, conniving, and a bit snide, but at the end of the day, she was a sweet person who, at the end, who whenever she did something wrong, would do her best to make up for it, no exceptions. And I think that's honestly a good. I honestly think that's a well-written and strong character, and ultimately I think was developed well. As such, I think the final character that really is talking about is the Beast, as he is essentially the designated antagonist for Over the Garden Wall. And I admit, while the Beast isn't very much a developed villain, he's pretty one note, as his whole desire is to turn Wirt and Gregg into trees so they can light the lantern. At the end of the day, I think he is a pretty decent villain for the show, as 99.9% of the time you see him in the show, he's cloaked in shadow, and the only way you can really see him is through an outline, and the outline is clearly something not human. Well, it's humanoid enough. There are some elements about it that just seem weird. The glowing eyes, the fact that he has these two big horns that look like trees, the way when you actually see his hands, they're spindly. The way he moves around, it very much makes him feel like an unhuman presence, which is appropriate for something called the Beast. But at the same time, there are still some human elements to him that I think do well in making him look even creepier. Case in point, his voice. He always spoke with this almost faux pas gentlemanly demeanor. He always talked, whenever he spoke to someone, it would always be like in a kindly voice, like he was concerned for your well-being, like he was worried that you wouldn't be doing the proper thing. Like when the woodsman seemed to be faltering, he said, maybe I should hold on to the lantern for a while. Or when he went to Gregg and helped Gregg to get them out of the unknown. It felt he felt cordial, but it was a hint of venom. And I think it worked well when he got angry. As when he got angry, his voice turned forceful, still having the same tone to it, but definitely in a much deeper baritone. As he went from sweet and kind to stern, like you're being talked down to by your father. And in this case, it's just that in this case, instead of being told you shouldn't have done that, son, instead of saying, no, you're wrong to defy me. These are my woods, and if you wander in, you're never leaving. It's especially helped in the final episode when Wirt ends up essentially calls him out, and he just gets pissed. He legitimately does sound threatening, and like I said, there is a split-second scene in the final episode where you see what he looks like, and it's fucking horrifying. Essentially, he looks like he's made up of the tree. Essentially, it looks like he's made up of various faces just scattered across his body with holes for the eyes and the mouths, and it just goes all across his body, and it's just this, ugh. It looks so goddamn creepy. It really does give me the chills. And when I saw it, and the first time I saw it was doing these vlogs, as when I watched the episode, I had to pause it right at that moment because I wanted to get a good look at it. It just made me feel ew. It just made me feel ugh. It kind of made me cringe because, well, let me just say this. If you have trypophobia, don't look for the image of the Beast, because I think it's a potentially triggering scene, of the potentially triggering image, especially when you see the faces all across his body. It's just very much horrifying, but it's a nice little split-second blink and you'll miss it. And even if you don't get a good look at it, you do see enough of it to know he is not human. That despite his demeanor, despite how he looks in shadows, he is not human. He is a beast in the purest sense, and it really does add a bit of gravitas to him, especially with him acting as a ghostly presence following the kids. Again, I will say that I think there are some better villains out there, and it's like I said, the Beast is pretty one note in his desires to keep Wirt and Gregg there, but at the same time, I think he makes up for it with his creepy demeanor, always being in the shadows, his unhuman design, and even his voice, which another thing I think makes him even creepier, he likes to sing, and he sings so much jovial tunes, chopping the wood to light the fire, finding wood to light the fire, finding wood to light the fire to keep it going eternally. it really does well in making like lighthearted singing feel off-putting, because if you hear that singing off in the distance, you know the beast is close and he's probably hunting you. And I think that works. I think it works really well to create a mood and well as add to the sense of unease that the series was setting to create, especially for a Halloween miniseries. So overall, well, I'm trying to think of anything else. Another thing I could probably mention is the music. The music throughout the whole series really was moody, very nice. Had some nice piano music. It had plenty of nice songs to dance to or sing along with. The music itself was always appropriate for the episode, being lighthearted or dreary when it wanted to be. Ultimately, it did a nice job doing it. The voice acting I think was really well done, with a nice cavalcade of character of strong talent for everything. Elijah Wood did a great job playing his Wirt, definitely getting across how much of a worrywart he was. Christopher Walken, I think, did a great job as the woodsman and making him. Yeah, did a great job as the woodsman, showcasing just how weary he was and yet how adamant and strong he was. And I don't know the name of the voice actor who did the Beast, but he did, like I said, he did a great job of making him appropriately creepy and stern in his delivery. So I think that's all. I think that's a nice thing. And I already mentioned the design. I think it's all works well, and honestly, altogether, I think while I do have a few minor problems with Over the Garden Wall, that's all they are. Minor problems. At the end of the day, I think Over the Garden Wall is a very strong miniseries, and I can see why people come back to it every year, because it's a very creative series too. It has so much going for it. And when I watched it for these vlogs, it really did feel like I was going on a trip. I was adventuring with these kids throughout the unknown. That behind every corner was something strange and surreal, but at the same time, you were still enticed to want to see more, as it felt odd and threatening, but it always welcomed you in. It made you feel like that you were entering into a strange, well, unknown place. It's a known place. You were always weary when entering, but you were always curious to see where it would lead you, where your path would lead you. And as the series went along, you continually wanted to see and as you saw Wirt and Greg going through, it was always nice to see the different wonders the unknown held, as well as the terrors. When you saw them entering Auntie Whisper's home with Larna, it made you wonder just what was behind the corner here. When they entered Pottsfield, you got a sense of unease, but as you continued seeing it, the more you felt welcomed. Just every episode offered something new and unique that always made you kind of wonder what was really going on behind the surface. And it did a great job at enticing you in to want to see where things were going. So, and I think, and on top, and I think that helps I think that's another reason why people keep coming back to it, because it's a fun little journey into a strange little corner of the unknown that ultimately I think makes you wish to see more. And I think that's another reason why people keep coming back to the series every year, because it is a nice little journey. It's very moody, very much whimsical, but mysterious. It's just at the end of the day, I think Over the Garden Wall is a very creative, very mysterious, but overall a very enjoyable series with plenty of nice twists and turns to keep you on your toes. Some nice characters that they do well in establishing and expanding on as the series goes on. Some very interesting episodes with some very creative talent, very creative stories, and just overall fun yet moody atmosphere. And I think ultimately a nice ending that caps everything off I think does well in satisfying you. Like with the unknown, you don't really know. I will say this: the series doesn't answer all the questions, especially when it comes to the unknown and what exactly it is, because it's either a dying dream that Wirt and Greg were having, or it could have been some form of purgatory, which that one I think I kind of prefer as an explanation, because I don't like the idea if it's a dream, because I feel like it invalidates a lot of what they went through. Plus, there are signs they were in the unknown, with the frog still having Auntie Whisper's bell inside it, as well as the epilogue with all the characters. But at the same time, I don't think we should know what the unknown is. Regardless of what the unknown truly is, what we do know is what it is. And it's a strange, weird little corner of the world that you may not find yourself in very often, but if you happen to wander in, there's always something new and mysterious around every corner that will compel you to go further in. Just just be weary with which direction you take, because you may not find your way out again. So overall, I think Over the Garden Wall is a good time, and if you haven't seen the series yet, I highly recommend it. It's on DVD right now, and even at the time that I'm recording this, Cartoon Network is planning on showcasing the series tomorrow night on Halloween. So if you really want to sit down and watch it, I recommend that. But if you want to have it on home media, buy the DVD. I got this for like $10 on Amazon last year, and I don't see a reason why it would go up in price. And this is a good DVD. It has all 10 episodes. It's got the pilot. It's got some nice commentaries and special features. Quite honestly, I recommend, if you want to get it, I recommend this. But otherwise, there are plenty of other ways to see it, streaming, on TV. I'm sure you could find it in a few guides here and there. But overall, if you haven't seen it yet and are curious about it, I recommend it. You are going to be in for a good time regardless of the medium. And overall, I think it's just worth watching. And like I said, I can see why people come back to it every year. So yeah, I think that's about it. I thank you for watching this vlog. I hope you enjoyed yourself through these 5 weeks I've talked about it. I think this is a nice little experiment to do the Halloween vlog, and I do plan to do another Halloween vlog next year, which I'm having people vote about that on my Twitter. So if you'd like to if you'd like to check that out and vote, you can go to my Twitter, which I'll link in the description. Which I'd say vote fast, because that's going to be ending in the morning tomorrow. So work fast. So you can decide if you want to decide what I look at next year, go ahead. But otherwise, if you enjoyed these vlogs, like I mentioned at the beginning, I do a series of vlogs on Friday, and I do those, and I pretty much do those all year round. At the time I'm doing these vlogs, I'm doing a Steven Universe vlog, so you can tune in on that every Friday. And if you like it, you could probably become a regular watcher. If not, fine, I understand. I kind of ramble, which you can probably tell by watching this video. But even then, if you if you are interested in following me more, I not only have a YouTube, I also have a Twitter account, which I already mentioned. I also have a Tumblr. I'm also on Instagram. So if you want to follow me on any of those, I'll link them in the description below. But if you think you've had your fill of me, if you think you had your fill of me and don't want to watch anymore, I completely understand as well. But I do hope at the end of the day that you enjoyed yourself, and I hope you enjoy this journey into the unknown with me, and I hope that I will see you again next year. And if not, it was a pleasure having you. I hope you have a good night. I hope you take care, and a happy Halloween to all of you. So, from me to you, good night. Sweet dreams.